Welcome, Ramona, to the Skillabration Podcast. Ramona is one of our teachers at Skillabration. She's our French teacher. Bonjour, Mademoiselle.
Bonjour, Nikki.
Ça va?
Ça va bien, et toi?
I only speak a little bit of French with those few words. But Ramona, I'd love for you to share just a little bit about your background, like what made you interested in learning French and, why do you think it's important for kids to learn a foreign language? Like, how did it benefit you? Some of those details.
Okay. I learned French because I learned to swim. Um, I joined the swim team in my community, and I was meeting kids that went to the public school because I went to a Catholic grade school and had a lot of friends there, decided to go to the public high school, and I signed up for French because one of my best friends was taking French because her older brother and sister had taken French. And I always liked it. I mean, I never had any big ambition to learn French. But my junior year, my school had a trip. We missed 3 weeks of school in February and went to France and did a week in Paris and then stayed 2 weeks in this little tiny town, and we stayed with families. And I don't like to date myself, but it was right after Ronald Reagan had taken office. And the family that I stayed with was really good about having me meet other people. And people would say things to the family like, well, what does she think of Ronald Reagan? And the family would say, ask her, she speaks French, which was really funny because I was in French 3 at the time and never thought, much about it. And when we were there, I found that I was the person that when we would go to the post office, I would order stamps for everyone from my school. When we would go to the restaurant, I would be the one that would ask the waiter, qu'est-ce que c'est l'épaule? What is this odd food that's mentioned on a pizza? It's a different word for ham. And so I really loved it. I was like, wow, I am walking down the street and I can see the Eiffel Tower and I can go in and buy a croissant. And the kids that are still back at home are just looking at it in a textbook. And so I spoke a lot, and I came back, and my French teacher, who hadn't gone along with us, um, was impressed. Like, I was talking a mile a minute, and she was like, wow. So after that, I really loved French and France, and I wanted to get back. And I took a roundabout way into teaching, which is another long story. But I say it's changed my life.
Uh-huh.
It influenced my career path, my education choices, lots of different things. Everyone should learn a foreign language. I think it's important. So
Yes, totally. When
yeah.
you said it's benefited you in multiple ways, I
Mhm.
100% agree with that. There's so many like follow-up questions I have right now. So like
Feel
one
free.
question, you might have said this, but I might have missed it, but
Mhm.
was that a high school trip?
It was a high
Uh,
school trip.
okay.
Yes. We were
Okay.
gone for 3 weeks in February. And it was kind of like the first time we had done it, I think, or my school had done it like today, that would never happen. And we really didn't have a lot of homework. Like the English teacher said, oh, if you're looking for something to do, you could read this book, which I was like, I'm reading my own book, so I never did
Yeah.
it. And we came back and I was like, oh, maybe I should have done that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I think about that today too. And as a teacher, students would have come to me and said, hey, I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks because I'm going to do this. I would have been like, I don't know what I think about that. But yeah, it was pretty amazing.
So was the trip like, I don't understand the backstory of the trip. How did that end up happening at like you said, the middle of February? Why was it
Yeah,
kind of random like that?
I don't know. Like looking back, I'm really curious as to what kind of organization or
Oh.
group my school worked with. And something that's funny. So was that like 3 years later, I was doing my semester abroad in college, and come to find out the school that we were paired with in France it has a reputation in France, or it did at the time, as kind of like a school for behavioral challenged children. So
Really?
I don't know how we got paired up with that school. It was really interesting, and then the
So were the kids
next.
misbehaving while you were there, like in
Not
class or?
not that I noticed, but
Okay.
then some of them came over to our school the next year, And we
Okay.
hosted a guy, and oh, he was kind of like one of the bad boys when we were there. A guy that I met, and I'm like, oh, we have to host him. Well, oh my goodness, things did not go well. He would be like out all night partying, and my parents were less
Oh,
than happy with that. So yeah, looking back, I'm not sure exactly how my school got involved in this. Actually, when I think about it, they did go the year before I went because my French teacher was gone when I was in French too. And then the year that I went, the librarian went with us because she spoke French
oh,
as
okay,
well.
that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it was interesting. It's a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
And then how many kids were there?
There were seven from my school, and we were paired in our little town with another school from Rhode Island, East Greenwich, Rhode Island.
Mhm.
And they must have had probably 15 to 20 kids in that group. And then we were kind of parceled out because this school was a boarding school. So the families that we stayed with, a lot of them weren't really associated with this school. Like I was in a little town, probably a 20-minute van ride away, and the family that I stayed with had a bakery, and their daughter, who was probably in her early to mid 20s, was a nurse. And so she had her own apartment somewhere in the town. And so that's who I stayed with. But like we would go to the bakery and have meals with her parents for every meal other than like breakfast. And then lunch was at the school. But for dinner, we would do that.
And you built your fluency in just 3 weeks. You saw a drastic change.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I tell this story to my students. So when we were parceled out, one of my friends from my high school was also staying with a family in this little town. And so one, I think it was a Friday night, my family was doing something, and every time they were doing something, they would farm me out someplace else for dinner. So this night, I was at my friend's house for dinner, and her French brother was probably a couple years older than we were, and he was going to school for some like cosmetology or thing. I remember him bringing out like this Barbie head that he was using to to practice his skills. But anyway, in the course of dinner, I noticed like he would ask us questions, and I would answer, yes, because blah blah blah, or no, because blah blah blah. Whereas my friend, who was family that so she stayed with the family, she would just answer yes or no, and then pretty soon he got tired of talking to her and he just talked to me, and that was it. And so I say to my students, like, try and do more with it instead of just giving the minimum.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
again, I think, I barely knew the past tense when I went. I'm sure, my French was horrible, but I think I got over the fear of speaking to people, and that helped
Right.
too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you had already finished or completed French 1 at that point, and
French
then
1 and 2. Yeah, I was
and
in
2.
French
Okay.
3. Mhm.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So that gives us an idea of just like where you were at level wise.
Yeah.
Um
Mhm.
in terms of like getting over fear, I can relate to that and asking questions.
Yes.
So for me, as an example, I would go on trips, family vacations to
Mhm.
Mexico, just to tourist cities. And my background is not Hispanic, but that's where my family chose to go on vacation
Yeah.
when I was growing up. And um, my mom would sit me in the front seat with the taxi driver, and she would say, because she knew my goal was to learn Spanish,
Mhm.
she's like, just ask any question, like even if you just ask what time is it, or
Mhm.
and so that was such a great way to test my fluency and
Yeah.
improve the even the listening skills,
Mhm.
because asking que hora es, like what time is it,
Yeah.
and they respond back in a classroom versus out in real
Right.
life, you're like, oh my gosh, that
Ju
was so fast, I have no idea what you
yeah.
said,
But
but it
like a
gets you.
real person understands me and can
Yes,
answer back. That yeah, it's very
yes,
empowering. Mhm.
it totally is.
Yeah.
It's exciting, and it pushes you outside of your comfort zone when you're talking about translating for people.
Mhm.
You were the go-to student to order or to ask questions,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. Like I've been put in that position with my family because I'm the only one who's bilingual
Mhm.
in Spanish and English. And so if we're on a trip and talking to locals, they're like, "Okay, can translate this." I end up translating for like an hour or interpreting
Mhm.
for like an hour.
Yeah.
because I'm like, but it's so
It
fun.
is fun, yeah.
So,
And you never know, like, when you're going to learn a new vocabulary word or a new
yes.
expression, or like, oh my gosh, they just use relative pronouns. I understand that, and I can do that back.
Yes, exactly. And especially like back in the day, learning in a more traditional environment, because
Hmm.
now there's different schools of thought on
Yeah.
like comprehensible input
Hmm.
versus the traditional style, and
Yeah.
teaching through a vocab list and grammar versus like just doing full immersion in the classroom.
Yeah.
Um, I always feel like learning that more traditional style actually set me up for success,
I
even though like
agree.
even though I said like, okay, they said what time is it, and I struggled with it,
Hmm.
but I knew, like you said, I could put into context, okay, this grammar point, I
Yes.
just heard it in real life, or I heard
Yes.
it in a
Hmm.
song. Now I understand how it works.
Yeah.
It helped me improve my English skills so much.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I still find a lot of value in
Hmm.
learning grammar, teaching grammar.
Yes, and I
So
love it too. I know the schools of thought that say, "Oh, grammar is bad, vocabulary lists are bad." I don't know. No, they're not.
I think there's value. Like I like blending a little bit,
Yes.
I like blending them because I do think there's value to adding that conversational piece to class
Yes.
as well.
Hmm.
So I think that's kind of where when I learned at least, that was the piece that was missing. Um,
Yes.
adding that in.
Yes. Yep.
So,
I agree.
what's a favorite story you have from visiting France? Do you have anything that comes to mind?
Oh, lots of them. I don't know how appropriate some of them are. I always, and maybe you will appreciate this just having been to France yourself this
Yes.
fall. But the word chez in French, Chez,
Hmm.
means at the home of, and it's often used
Okay.
in restaurants like Chez Paul, Paul's restaurant, or something like
Oh
that.
yeah. I've
Okay.
seen it.
Yes, it's a word that we see in English fairly often.
Looks like
So
you said it looks like Chez.
Chez,
It looks
yeah.
like Ches,
It
but
looks
it's
like
pronounced
chaise.
Shay.
It's pronounced chez because if you
Okay.
say chaise, that is the word for chair in French, which is Chaise.
Okay.
It's all about the silent letters and the combinations and the phonics, which is one of your questions too. But anyway, so I had learned that in my French career. And then when I went to France for the first time, I'm hearing all of these French people use the term je sais pas, je sais pas, je sais pas, je sais pas. And I'm like, who the heck is this pa person? And why is everybody going to that person's house? Well, it turns out the expression in French for I don't know is je ne sais pas. But when the French speak, they drop the ne part, so the first part of the negative expressions, and it comes out like je sais pas. So people were saying, I don't know. And when I figured that out, I was like, "Oh, wow, that's what this is." Because I'd been there. It was probably close to the end of the trip one night. We were at, of all things, like a Red Cross activity, like for first aid bandaging at the local Maison des Jeunes, which is kind of like a YMCA type thing in this tiny town, and people were talking like that. So that's another story I would tell my students too, like, when you learn this word, Shay, watch out.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it interesting when I asked you the question like a favorite memory, it does go back to language
Hmm.
because there's certain phrases that I remember learning in the moment as well. It's
Yes.
amazing how learning in that moment in context or in a real life situation, it can stick in your memory
Yes.
forever.
Yes. You've got an anchor to something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's really
Hmm.
cool.
Yes.
Um, we talked a little bit, you had mentioned like there's other skills besides just becoming bilingual that there's a huge benefit to that you might not think of. What are a couple skills that you think you came away with from traveling, studying abroad, learning another language that,
Um, yeah.
families might want to hear about?
This is a personal story too.
Yeah.
So in my language learning, for my master's degree, I did a program that I studied in France every summer for a 5 week stint, and we stayed with families. And I stayed with the same family for 12 summers running. I had like some kind of record that I'd gone to the program the most times in a row. But anyway, um, a couple years into my travels for the program, my parents and my sister and I traveled over to France like a week before I was supposed to start my program. So we had toured around a little bit, and then we went to Angers, my French hometown, and pulled up to my family's house, my French family's house, at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And my French mom is home. She doesn't speak any English, even though she's traveled to the U.S. a couple of times. She every once in a while comes out with a random word like she knows chicken, like from restaurants. So anyway, she's there, and she, welcomes my family, my parents and my sister there. And oh, would you like something to drink? And my family, no, 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 like we don't want to impose. And so they left, went on their way. And then later, when my French dad comes home, and then my French sister was living in the same town at the time, but had her own apartment, they all came over and they're like, oh, how was the family? And my French mom was like, they didn't stay. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, that was a faux pas. That was rude on my parents' part. Like,
Okay.
we don't want to impose on the person that we're visiting, but to the French, that is something that you do. You offer something to drink or something to eat when someone comes to their house. So that was a valuable lesson, just kind of a little difference that I'd never heard before, but learned it through living it. And I still feel
Yeah.
bad to this day that, we didn't do things in a way that we should have at the time.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one of those things where you learn about, you can see the world through the lens of another culture.
Yes.
And that helps on so many levels, just in
Hmm.
communication and understanding how the world works.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, what what mindset do you think students need for learning a language?
I think they need to be open to new things. I'm sure you've had this too with students when they say, that's weird. No, it's not weird, it's different. And that's the line. We even had t shirts in my department made one year that said that in all the different languages. That you need to be open to what other cultures find normal is probably the wrong word, but how people live, what they do, it can help you understand your own culture, your own language, your own country, as well as learning about the target language culture in countries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I When you visit France, how many languages do you think people speak when you've traveled? Have you been to you're primarily visit France, but have you gone to
Yes.
like other countries in
Yes.
Europe, and like do you notice that Europeans tend to be multilingual, bilingual at minimum?
Yes, yes, I do. And the French are kind of funny because they often think like, "Oh, my English is not good enough to use." Um, but yeah, it's amazing how early they start learning it and just how English is all over the place. It's interesting too when I'm there and I'm speaking French and people obviously know that I'm not French, but they don't guess that I'm American right away, because they don't think that Americans learn languages well enough to speak them. So they will usually, are you English? Are you from Belgium? Are you, something like that, which is sad, that we don't value it as much as um, other cultures do. But yet, also, every time I go to France, it infuriates me the amount of English that the French use just because it's cool and it's chic. And I'm like, I'm fighting tooth and nail here in my country for your language. And you're, just throwing English words into things and saying yes as your explanation or that sort of thing.
Are you saying they're like mixing the languages? They add English while they're speaking French as like
Yes.
it's a cool thing to do?
Yes, especially
Okay.
kids do that.
Okay.
One of the neighbors in France, she was an interesting lady. When she was still working, she and I would ride the bus to town together in the morning, and she really enjoyed the French language. Like she used to take little classes about French. And we were over at their house for an aperitif one afternoon, and she was talking about she and her husband would go to Spain in the summer. They had like a camping car and would drive down there. And she was talking about, oh, these campsites were so clean. And she was actually using the word clean, clean. And I said to her, like, Michelle, you love French. What are you using that English for? And she said, truthfully, I don't really even understand the word. I don't know why I'm using it. I'm like, yes.
You converted one.
Converted one. But so, like my French dad talks about typing documents on Word, and I always translate everything. And my students, I do this too in the classroom too. I'm like, Mo. So anything that we can translate, I will translate. You don't go to Six Flags, you go to Six Drapeaux. Um, you do not cheer for the Green Bay Packers, mais les emballeurs de baie verte. Type of thing, which is a
A-
little nutty, but
You mentioned the word aperitif. Is that appetizer?
no, that's a drink. Like,
Oh, that's a drink.
yes.
Okay. I was thinking like aperitivo, like
No. Okay, apéritif. Oui, apéro. They say as a shortcut too.
okay, got it. I'm glad I asked because definitely didn't know. I guess I should have known from looking at menus in Paris, but maybe I
Yes.
missed that
But
one.
but yeah, that'll be the drink section, the
Yeah.
apéritif. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Now that you say it, I feel like it's ringing a bell. It takes a while to learn sometimes. You have to see
Yes.
words over and over again before you
Exactly.
remember.
What is it? 37 times you're supposed to be exposed to them, I think.
Exactly, yes. So, and that's where it goes back to that question of mindset, like
Mhm.
not just the openness, but also the perseverance and the stamina that comes with learning a language. Don't
Yes.
expect results immediately,
Yes. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So it's a long game
It is
for
a
sure.
long game. But yet sometimes too, I think students don't appreciate what they know. I used to tell my students in the classroom, like, okay, at the beginning of second semester, like, you really know a lot. You can't say everything that you would want to say in English, because you're talking like a kindergartner, but look at all the different topics that you know about already. Things like describing the weather, telling time, counting, talking about people, talking about family members. I mean, that's a lot of stuff. And I think it's hard, but I remember too, as a language learner, like, you don't want to put yourself out there and take a risk all the time. It's scary, um,
Mhm.
to do so. And, the kids that, the students, the language learners that are able to do that have a far
Mhm.
richer experience. And I think they progress faster and easily, with more ease.
100%.
Mhm.
Speaking and putting it in practice takes you another level. It takes you to
Yes.
another level with your language fluency, and so on different aspects. Like I said, there's the listening fluency, the
Yes.
speaking fluency.
Hmm.
So it just builds and builds as you practice.
Yeah.
And I've witnessed that too with teaching English as a second language.
Hmm.
Um, the students who I worked with, I used to teach middle school ESL in like a bilingual environment,
Uh-huh.
and the students who participate with
Yes.
speaking,
Yeah.
they grow like
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
I used to have a rule in my classroom that once the students got to French 3 and above, you weren't supposed to speak any English in the classroom from the moment you came in to the moment you left, whether the bell had rung or not. And I would always tell them, like, if you are afraid to speak and hold back, that's going to impede your progress. Everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. It's okay. No one's going to jump on you for it. And if
yeah,
you get over that fear, you're going to make more progress. And, the
exactly.
ones that did it were like, oh, yeah, mademoiselle, you're right. Uh-huh.
That's I love the Michael Jordan quote. Like he's talks about how many shots he's taken, basketball
Mhm.
shots, and he's like, I failed and failed and failed
Mhm.
until I succeed. So
Yes. Yeah.
it's part of the process of
Yes.
learning
Yes.
anything, not
Yes.
just language.
Hmm.
So, um, what is you spoke about your students a little bit. What are some things that students love about working with you and taking French with you?
I think, they would have to kind of sign on for the crazy. Again, we translate everything. But Mademoiselle, that's a proper name. I don't care. We're still gonna I'm like, you might learn some extra vocabulary if we do that. Um, so they were pretty good. And what I always love too is when the kids were willing to have fun with the language. Like one year there was a group of kids that would they translated the expression good one, bon on, which I would say that like when I was in France and people are like, what are you talking about? Or they'll translate Cheez Its, fromage ça, things like that.
Hilarious.
Yeah, and so each class always seemed to have like their own little expressions or things that they would say that would make everybody kind of giggle, and to another class that would mean nothing. Um,
Right.
but it's kind of like the little community that you develop, and I had the advantage that the students stayed with me. Was often the only French teacher that was teaching French that
Oh.
year. So I knew the kids really well. They knew me really well. They knew each other really well. So it was a community. Um, I like to laugh. I like to play games. I like to, listen to music. And that's all things that we would do in the classroom too that, kids would like.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. And just so people know, you're talking about your
Yes,
experience as
when I
a
was a classroom teacher, so before I
yes.
came to out school. Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. When you mentioned your master's program, just in
Yes.
case people are curious, like, does
Mhm.
that program, does it still exist? And like, where did you go? Where was it at? Because things change over the years, so I was just
Yes.
curious.
The program was through the University of Northern Iowa, and they had started, like when I started going, I want to say it was in like the 30 somethingth year. My high school French teacher had actually gone on that program, it turned out. Um, I did it for 12 years. I stopped going in 2009. They did it in 2010, and then that was it. So I like to say, après moi, le déluge, which is also a famous quotation from Louis the 14th. So after me, like chaos,
Yeah.
which is really too bad. It was started by a French professor at UNI, the University of Northern Iowa. And I don't know why they chose Angers, France, which is on the west end of the Loire
Yeah.
Valley. I think the French there is pure, like not not horribly heavily accented. Um, but they established this program, and I think one of the strengths of it was that we stayed with families. So they had this network of families. Like when I started going, some of these families had been with the program since year one. Um, and it was a really neat thing. I think the recession in 2008 hit people hard financially. French kind of started losing footing in the US as far as
Mhm.
programs, and then some changes that the university made in their approach. When the program was started, it was really for people who taught French, whether that was in a middle school or a high school. And towards the end, the evolution of it, I think they were trying to prepare people that were going to go on and perhaps get a doctorate in French, which is really not the same thing.
Mhm.
So they were trying to put their program on a footing with like the French program at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, which were like two different animals.
Okay.
Which is too bad because I did a lot of promotion for the program. In 2010, the first year that I didn't do it, I actually did a program through Rutgers University called French Teachers at the Louvre. That we would,
Wow.
yeah, it was really neat. We went to the Louvre every day for 2 weeks. We had to like give a presentation on a painting in the museum with all the tourists and everything around
Wow.
there. Yeah, it was a cool experience. But I was constantly talking about my Angers program, and people said, "Oh, you've made me want to go on this program." And I'm like, "I'm doing promotion for this thing, and now you folded the program." I think they sold it to the University of Southern Oregon. It's maybe a little different. I'm not sure if it still exists or not,
In
but
the way
it's
that
too
it
bad.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's why I was wondering because I did like I asked my Spanish teacher when I decided to that I was going to major in Spanish. I was
Hmm.
like, "Where did you study?"
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I know that maybe something listeners want to know. Um so thanks for sharing that. What
Yeah.
about the Rutgers opportunity? That sounds really cool.
Yeah, and I don't know how long that had gone on or how long it went after it. It turned out that one of the girls who was there, she was French, which I didn't even realize this until the end of it. And she was like a doctoral student.
Mhm.
And so this was kind of her thesis to develop this program for teachers at the Louvre. Um, and either she was pregnant or the other person who was a professor at Rutgers was pregnant. So I don't know if they still do that. And somebody had recommended it to me. I'm trying to think of um, where, maybe like on an AP listserv or something like that. But
Okay.
it was a really um, cool thing. We did a lot of
Hmm.
neat things in the 2 weeks that we were there.
Yeah, I would just tell students too, like if language is something you want to focus on for your bachelor's or master's, definitely look into specific schools that focus
Yes.
on language,
Yes.
because they could have really neat programs like
Hmm.
what Mademoiselle was talking about. So research it because
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
lots of cool opportunities. I know when I was getting my master's, I did my practicum at a local high school, and there was a similar program like your French one,
Hmm.
that was based out of California. I'm not
Oh,
100% sure of the name of the university, but they did a similar thing where they went to a different country though every year
okay.
that speaks
Yeah.
Spanish. So
Yeah.
every summer.
Hmm.
But that was the master's program, and then at the end, I think they had to present a thesis, and it was pretty intense, but it
Yeah.
sounded like a really good program.
Yeah.
So
I always tell high school students, it's not too early when you're thinking about what you're doing after high school to look at what colleges have for their language experience. Do they have study abroad programs? Do they have things that you can maybe combine with like engineering in a language or education in a language? That sort of thing. Like you might not think of it now, but it will be a skill that you'll be happy to have developed when you're out
yeah,
there in the work world.
definitely,
Mhm.
absolutely. Um, so going back to, we talked a little bit, you had mentioned pronunciation.
Yes.
So what are some tips that you might have for students learning French? Is there anything fun you can teach us on the podcast?
Um, French has a lot of silent letters, so the pronunciation and the spelling are the most challenging things of the French language. However, we have the most cognates to English, so words that look alike. And the reason for that is when William the Conqueror conquered England in 1066, for the next 400 years, the kings that were sitting on the throne of England were actually French, and they brought a lot of their language over with them. Um, so when I am teaching students, and I say this over and over and over again, even through, the most advanced levels from beginners to the advanced ones, you want to remember the word careful, C, R, F, and L, because in French, those are, and there are tons of exceptions in French, but for the most part, those are the only final consonants that you pronounce. Okay, so if the word ends in a C, R, F, or L. So for example, the word par, P-A-R-C, oops, I'm speaking French, P-A-R-C, I can say park, and I can pronounce the C. But the word pour, P-O-R-T, for port, I don't hear the T, pour. If I
Oh,
put an E after the T, now I pronounce the T, port. And that means door, whereas pour means like the port, the harbor type of thing.
okay. Okay.
Yes, so you
That's
have
super
to be,
helpful.
yes, you have to be careful of the consonants.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the tip.
You are welcome.
Um, let's see here. What about techniques for teaching a language? Do you think that, because we work with a lot of homeschool
Hmm.
families at Skillabration, what do you think if a parent wants to teach French or maybe another foreign language? Do you have any tips for teaching? Or maybe we're listening, like maybe our listeners are educators.
Hmm.
So along those lines.
Practice, I think, is important. 5 to 10 minutes a day is all your brain probably can handle when you're beginning. But the more that you can do to repeat and to get information into your long term memory, the richer your language experience is going to be. Um, I like to, as I know you do too, like to learn use songs, especially with beginners. And I will tell the kids, okay, now you've learned the song, the months of the year, you've listened to the song for the months of the year. Now we're going to do some speaking activities with the months of the year. And if you get stuck, you can't remember how to say July, sing a song to yourself, whether it's in your head or if you want to sing it out loud. That's going to help you. Same thing like with the alphabet. or the days of the week. I'm trying to think of other ones that I've recently
Mhm.
done with students. But that sort of thing, anything that you can do to make a connection for yourself, I think is great. That I work with one on one. He always does a terrific job of making connections with words. And he's very young, so I find it impressive that he knows how to do this already. But his mother is a non native English speaker, so perhaps, his um, education in the home has kind of come from that. But the fact that he does that now, early in his language career, it's cool to see. And he talks through his process a lot. I have a lot of students on OutSchool that will do that. Like if I'm working with them one on one, they talk through the process, which I think is also helpful. Um, I tell my students, all my students, you have to practice. If you sit in your room and talk to your stuffed animal or to your dog, that's okay, but do it out loud. It's going to help you learn.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. Do I know the student?
No, he is not our mutual student.
Okay, okay.
Although our mutual student is one that does a good job of
He
talking
does.
through
He
his
does.
process, which I think you know as well. No, but
Yeah.
this other one, he's even younger than our mutual student.
Oh,
Yeah, he's just cute. Yeah.
love it. That's great. Um, all right. So we're gonna go through a few rapid fire
Okay,
questions.
I'm going to scroll down to the rapid fire list on that document.
All right. What is your favorite lesson to teach?
I like teaching the calendar. I don't know why. Days of the week, months of the year, I think they're really fun. I always like the visuals that I had to teach those when I was in the classroom. And now that I'm on OutSchool, I use those same pictures with activities in my lessons. And the kids kind of are like, I don't understand why you're connecting this. I'm like, just go with it. And they do.
Yes. What about favorite food related to the culture of the language you
Oh,
teach?
this is a hard question. I've been thinking about it for days, and I don't know that I can answer it because I love it all. I am the world's pickiest eater. I eat like a 2-year-old, but when I'm in France, I am much more adventurous. My French mom is a really good cook, although she sometimes will like hide things in mashed potatoes. Like she'll chop up turnips or zucchini and something. I'm like, ew. So that I don't appreciate, but I love like anything related to charcuterie like pate and saucisson, things like that are just delicious and we can't get them here.
Is charcuterie a French word?
It is a French word, and I think it's funny how it's kind of been adapted into English. It literally means like cold cuts, and it has to do with meat that comes from a pig, so pork meat.
Oh,
But
interesting.
now the
That
whole charcuterie and the pronunciation is a little off, which has the cheese and the olives and the little garnishments
yes.
and stuff. It's a little different, but at least
Yeah.
it's a French word that's come into English, so I'm
Yeah,
all for
yeah.
that.
How many times have you been to France?
Oh, shoot, I should have looked up because I have a document. I think 31.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Trips, some, for my own studies and some just for personal. I have not been there in 4.5 years, which is, I think, the longest I've gone since the first time I went. Darn COVID. Um, so I hope to get back soon.
Yes, definitely. I hope you do too. So much fun to travel.
Oh, it is. But I keep going
Um,
back to the same place. Like, there's so many places in the world to go. And I keep going
yes,
back to Angers. But yet, somebody said to me once, if you have this French family, you have to work to maintain the relationship with them. And that's true.
absolutely. I just got to visit a friend who came to Chicago. I went to live with her family when I was 15.
Hmm.
We saw each other 25
Oh my
years later.
gosh.
So
Fun.
yeah, she's from Mexico
Okay.
City, and she gave me such a good time
Hmm.
when I was there. Like,
Yeah.
and I stayed with her for a week because she was the cousin of the
Okay.
family
Yeah.
that I stayed with in Mexico, and I was with her cousins, which was my host family, for
Hmm.
5 weeks,
Oh my
and then
gosh.
I went to stay with her for a week. It was a blast.
Yes.
So that was really cool. These relationships last,
Hmm.
like you said, for years.
Yes. Yeah.
So. Are there any other facts or information you want to share with us before we end our podcast episode?
Sure, and I will relate it to my favorite lesson. So, in French, the expression for April Fool's Day is le poisson d'avril, which literally means the fish of April. And kids are always like, why do you have that as a graphic for April Fool's Day? And the story is the tradition in France. I don't know if this is still done, but kids in school would cut out paper fish and then put a little piece of tape on it, and you'd walk up to your friend and kind of slap them on the back. Oh, bonjour, Nikki, ça va? And you would attach the fish to the back, and then everybody would, you walk off with a fish on your back, and that would make other people laugh. I don't know the origin of that.
Yeah.
I've seen things even that people have taken like big wooden fishes and attached them to car bumpers for April Fool's Day. It's just kind of different.
All right, well, that's a really fun. I'm so glad that you shared with information about learning French and about what your classes are like. If students want to sign up with you, just go to skillabration.com, and we'll also have the link in the show notes.
Okay, great.
Merci beaucoup, mademoiselle.
Merci beaucoup, Nikki.